Good evening. Tonight, I wanted to speak to you folks about common Sasquatch behavior. This is not all encompassing, and a lot of the reasons and ideas and theories about what these creatures do, these are just theories. Like I said, I think they do many things for many reasons and not always the same. But there's a lot of things that happen over the years that are generally reported that people have said time and time again. People who aren't Bigfoot people, people who don't know each other, don't know anything about the subject, report a lot of these strange things. And I wanted to go over some of them today. Like I said, this isn't everything they do, and this isn't all their explanations, but here's some of the things that I think that you should know if you're going out in the woods, or some of the signs to looking for. Chances are some of you have probably seen these things or had these things happen to you. And I've also made separate video on a few of these subjects, and I'll leave a link to them in the description. So let's jump into it. The first thing I wanted to speak to you guys about is stick structures. I've seen these in the woods. You out in the woods and you're like, wow, these logs look like they're snapped off, or no human could move these, or there's no possible way, like logs pointing uphill as opposed to breaking downhill. You walk across a trail and you come back a few hours later, and now there's a log drug across the trail, or you see big structures or trees turned upside down or twisted. This is all very common. Sasquatch does this stuff for a number of reasons: signaling, border boundaries, boredom, shelters, hunting blinds, especially when you see twisted logs like this going across roads and broken trees. It's kind of a do not block, kind of a good entrance, exit kind of a point. It's saying it's like a territory marker. Look how strong I am. I can take a 3 or 4 inch log and twist it and break it down. Now, the twisting is very common as opposed to breaks you might find naturally. Now, one of the other things that's very common for Bigfoot to do is tree knocking. Tree knocking, to me, has a couple of main purposes. One, it's a signaling device. They do it to knock back and forth, kind of a location without being verbal. It's also considered to be a hunting behavior. They can knock back and forth on trees, let them know where their location is while they're hunting. And also, I've heard stories about Sasquatch knocking against trees and then putting their ears against trees to listen for animals living inside, like hollow trees, looking for raccoons and possums. So it's definitely a hunting communication behavior on the tree knocking. And people go out in the woods and tree knock to try to call Sasquatch in. I'm guilty of it. I don't always know that's a great idea. I think they know it's humans, and I think you might fool them once, or if it's a hunting behavior, or it might be a challenge, or if they are communicating and they hear a strange knock, they're going to know something's up. So it might actually be counterproductive to do that in the woods. The other thing that gets reported all the time are howls, the long drawn out deep Ohio howl, and loud screams that are heard in the woods, and hoops and whoops and other sounds. And it's very common to hear these. These are pretty much associated, very monkey-like, but also human-like, but somewhat wolf-like. These things have an incredible voice range, and they can do high pitch, they can do low, and a howl can start off really low and deep and then go really high up and then be real long and drawn out. And what gets most people about their calls is the volume of which they can call, and the variety of sounds that they can make and mimic, answering coyotes and calling back and forth from mountain ranges. Since they don't have any other modern technology form of communication, we take it for granted that shouting and hollering and echo and know the good points to call, like wolves and coyotes and other species do. It's very common for these things to do this, and I don't always think it's a good idea to call either, because you might call in something, you might issue a threat, you don't know what you're saying to these creatures when you call and howl and hoop in the woods. If you're in a remote location, not near where anybody's sleeping, and you're not camping, you're in there for the day, and you do a few hoops or a howl or at night, that's one thing. But if you do it around a house or a property or your campground, you might be calling in something else, or an aggressive clan, or maybe you're not even a Bigfoot. You might be doing more harm than good by trying to mimic these calls that are heard. But they do it for a lot of different reasons, the same way that most people talk and communicate. Now, the samurai chatter that gets reported a lot in the woods, I've never heard this. I've heard hoops and howls, and I've heard other strange things in the night, and I've heard tree knocking. I've never heard the samurai chatter, but a lot of people report it, and it's forgive the really poor impression, but it's like a really kind of a mumble fast talk. People say it sounds like they're talking Russian, or if you watch like an old samurai movie and they're that very deep kind of fast talking cadence to their voice is reported a lot in the woods. And what I think this is just their version of language and talking, as opposed to a howl or whoops that are kind of like a hey there or what's up or where are you. I think this is them actually talking and discussing things. And it's quite eerie. If you go check out Ron Moorhead's Sierra Sounds, he's got one of the earliest versions of samurai chatter, and a lot of people have reported it, and going way back even before him. But very fascinating the way that they talk. And it's been analyzed, especially through the Sierra Sounds, that this is some form of language. It has the markers of language. Now, we don't know what they're saying, but it's been analyzed that they actually talk and has all the hallmarks and stuff of being communicative, not just sounds like cats meowing. It's actual language like humans have. Very fascinating. Sasquatch has been known to be a great mimic all sorts of sounds. There's even people who report Bigfoots being on the edge of civilization, like copying train whistles or copying like the sounds of like the beep beep that a forklift or something backing up would make, that kind of stuff. One thing that's reported a lot is the 800-pound owl thing. Now, I experienced this when we were at the property in the Sierra expedition I did back in February, where my friend Pat stepped outside and he heard this really deep hooing, and I'm like, did it sound like he said it sounded like the biggest owl he had ever heard. And we went out there was stuff crunching around and eye shine. We did a whole video on it, but for me it was a signal. I think it was the Sasquatch was really close to the house, like 10-15 feet from the house, hiding behind a giant tree. And I think he was a signal to the other ones, well, back off, the humans are coming outside. I think they were watching us through the windows and just kind of curious to what's going on. So I think they can do it as kind of a signal. It's kind of a way not to alert other animals. I think they do it out of boredom. There's also stories about people calling their dogs where they're not home, or their wife's not home and they hear their wife's voice calling them, or their dogs aren't there but they hear their voice calling their dog into the woods. Really creepy stuff, like guy goes to the backyard and he hears somebody call his dog in his voice, or his wife's voice, or they mimic dogs barking to try to lure people into the woods. And very creepy stuff. There's lots of stories about that. So they're really good mimics. They do it to lure. They do it, I think, even just to kind of mess with people sometimes, and for signaling each other. So it's pretty neat, some of the stuff that they can make, but also very scary at the same time. If they can mimic your wife's voice or your voice calling one or the other outside, that's scary. One thing that's very common, and I've experienced this in the past, is they'll tap on the side of a house or thump on the side of the house or scratch the side of the house or throw a shoulder into it sometimes and shake the whole building. It's pretty much because they know you're in there, and it's not so much to lure you out. I think it's just kind of a you're not welcome here, scare you, let you know they're there. I think there's a certain amount of curiosity and boredom. I think it's a lot of times a younger, more juvenile male screwing around, or if it's an older clan or an older male, maybe it's a dominance territory thing, and just, let's go throw birdseed and nuts at squirrels. I mean, it's kind of their idea of entertainment. Let's go wake up the humans and see what they do. So I think this is very common. Lots of people report this. I mean, it can be quite frightening because you don't know what they want or what they're after, or if it's intimidation, or if you have a dog or whatever they're trying to do, you don't know what they want. You can kind of interpret it sometimes, but tapping on the house, banging on the house, scratching, climbing on roofs, that kind of stuff gets reported. Moving stuff around outside, even gifting where they leave things outside your front door. That's very common. You leave some birdseed out and it's gone, something you didn't even tend for them, but there's, little mice left on your front door or something like that. That's very common. So they like to associate with houses and homes. If you want to keep them out of your home, the best thing you can do is set up cheap trail cameras, because they have very bright IR lenses and they see the IR is one of the theories, and put motion sensor lights out there. Keep some dogs around, and generally they tend to leave the actual house alone. One thing that's very common, a lot of people report, is if you live in the country on the edge of suburbia and edge of town, and you're closer to the woods, where a lot of people see these things and have them on their property regularly, as they steal livestock. Not always, because there's reports that they've never touched their livestock, but there's reports that get chickens stolen all the times, or the occasional sheep or goat missing, or dogs being killed and they find the remains later, or general type stuff where it's like something opened the hen house, killed a couple hens, they find the feathers deep in the woods and then like latched it afterwards, like that kind of creepy stuff. So general taking livestock, I think certain times of year when food's scarce, or you get a older individual that maybe can't hunt or produce as well, or it's just an easy meal, I think they're going to do it. And if they can take one chicken a day or two chickens a day, and they think they're getting away with it, but obviously you know how many chickens you have. So this is very common. Also stealing dog food, stealing bird seed, that kind of stuff. I've heard lots of stories about it. So this is just a very common behavior as well. Another thing I want to talk to you guys about is gifting. This is a very controversial subject. If you have them on your property, or they come through your property seasonally, or you're one of the places that has a resident population, a lot of people report, or you go out in the woods and you have a location. Best case scenario, if you're going to give these creatures anything, don't do it away from your house. Do it away from somebody else's house. Do it out in the middle of nowhere where nobody hardly ever goes. And don't give them food under any circumstances. Some people would argue with that. I am a very strong believer in not giving them food. You can give them mirrors or little toys or little pieces of glass, little small man-made objects, string, that kind of stuff, something that might catch their interest. Also, you might find that you're gifted back, like you leave some mirrors or some little marbles or something out there, and the next time you come out there's kind of feathers are very common, or rocks, or like that kind of stuff you might find there. You might find a skull or bones, just kind of a gifting thing back and forth. Now you're going to probably have to resist the temptation to put like a trail camera or a camera inside one of the gifts. I know people have tried. They can sense these things, they know these things, they can hear the electronics working, they can see the IRs. So just kind of keep it as like a mystery, more or less. I mean, you might be able to collect like hair or a fingerprint or something off of an object, but I would generally, if you're trying to make a relationship with a Bigfoot, don't give them food, and don't try to trick them in any way. Don't try to set up a camera or a trap or something for them. And that's pretty much my advice on gifting. And please don't do it around your house. One of the other super common things that they do is peer in through windows and looking through windows. People report, hey, I could usually see the light outside my window, but I couldn't see it, and they see a silhouette, or peeking in through them. I think generally this is curiosity. Sometimes it could be intimidation. You hear real creepy stuff about Bigfoot staring at women and children and stuff like that. And I think a lot of it is more or less a fascination or a curiosity, because if something's 7, 8, 9, 10 foot tall, even human size, they could smash a window and they could be in there real quick. So I think when they're just watching, that's all it is. It's just watching. It's just a curiosity. They don't have television in the woods. They don't have radio or the internet. We are their entertainment a lot of times, as frightening as it may be. So if you really don't want them peeking in, shut your blinds, shut your curtains, do blinds and curtains, put trail cameras by the windows, put lights outside of windows, and it generally stops that behavior. But it's generally very common and extremely frightening. The other thing that gets reported, and this is a little more obscure, but it does happen, is people who own horses and cattle. They report manes and tails being braided, somewhat very articulately, and very, like there's no other way in the world that a horse's mane or horse's tail is going to be braided. Sometimes it's more knotty, sometimes it's very articulate, and this is very common. And I think they have an appreciation for animals and a certain amount of boredom, just kind of like how chimpanzees and gorillas can have cats and dogs and everything else. I think they can have a little bit of appreciation for livestock sometimes, and beauty, and this is just one of their odd sides, but often gets reported, is that they do braid manes and tails. And this kind of leads us to Bigfoot hands are huge and can be very scary, because any creature that big is going to have huge hands. But you'll find handprints, way bigger than a human handprint, left on windows a lot of times, dirty windows, or even a clean window where you have kind of a, that kind of sweat, the oils in your hands leave marks. A lot of times you can even see dermal ridges and fingerprints if it's the right conditions. And if you know what you're doing, you can even collect DNA, cars as well, especially if you're camping or you come back and your car's dirty and you see there's a monster handprint, or you see nose prints in windows too, and even face prints as they're trying to look inside. So this is very common. This is a behavior that obviously I don't think they're doing on purpose, but they touch objects, because you got to remember metal's kind of foreign to them, glass is kind of foreign to them, plastic is kind of foreign to them, right angles are kind of foreign to them, things that are shiny. This is all foreign. This is all stuff that doesn't really occur in the woods. So they're going to want to touch it and they're going to want to experience it. And even if they've seen it, it's still kind of fascinating, or they like to lean on things and touch things or see how heavy things are. The other thing that is also very common are missing gut piles. Hunters report that, hey, they shot a deer and they hung it up in a tree and gutted it out. And, they come back an hour later after their deer hanging there to let it cool, which is very common, and the gut pile's missing. Or, they end up gutting a deer or cleaning fish or cutting up, or cleaning a bunch of birds that they shot, leave the gut pile, and they come back the next day and they're gone, and they don't find it torn up. They find it like picked up and missing, not like coyotes took it and tore it all apart and made a mess, like very cleanly missing, where buzzards and everything else can make a mess of it too. So this is very common. Missing gut piles and missing kills are very common, reported by hunters, especially in Bigfoot areas. The other thing that seems to be a very common Bigfoot hangout, especially if you're into the missing 411, is how many people go missing in briar patches and berry patches, especially different varieties of berries. There's lots of reports. And I think this is obvious because they probably eat the berries. I'm sure that they know when they're ripe, because chimpanzees and even birds know when fruit's ripe versus not ripe. So I'm sure they come and check on them. I'm sure they like to hang out there. They probably keep their young nearby. It's a food source. Also, other game and other things come and eat the fruit, so they probably also eat the game that eats the fruit. So berry patches are a place to look out for. Very common for them to hang out there. Here's one that I've encountered myself, is rock throwing and throwing of other objects. I've had acorns thrown at me. I've had basketball-sized rocks thrown at me over the years. I've had stuff bounce off the roof of houses before. Very common. This is primate behavior. Humans do it. Chimpanzees do it. Gorillas do it. It's kind of a way to keep distance. Like, they don't have firearms or bows and arrows that we know of. So this is kind of a way for them to do kind of a standoff type behavior, and keep their distance, drive you off, annoy you, keep you up. Many different reasons why they can do this, but generally it's not a good thing. If they're throwing rocks at you, they feel that they're being threatened, or maybe they're scared of you as well, and as opposed to doing a direct in-your-face confrontation, it's kind of their way of harassing you and driving you off. It could also be their way of kind of having a go at you as well. So these are just some of the more common things that Bigfoot does. This is not everything they do. There's lots of other behaviors. I'm probably going to look back on this video and go, oh, I forgot to add something. Also, I want to do some individual videos on some of these type of things. This video turned out a lot longer than I thought it was. There's so much to talk about here. If you think this is fascinating, you should go check out. There's so much field work and good stuff online, and so many good books out there. Even in BFRO reports and just kind of general reports, Sasquatch Chronicles is great because they just get average people on there all the time who aren't necessarily into this subject. Say that they're looking through their windows or tapping on their house or following their car or leaving them gifts. You hear all sorts of stuff, and this is absolutely fascinating, their behavior, because there's a lot of human behavior in there and there's a lot of primate behavior in there. So anyway, I hope you guys have a pleasant evening. Hope you learned something. Please stay safe in the woods, and whatever you do, don't feed these things.